Um, excuse me. We would like to note that the information in this presentation is for educational purposes only and does not constitute medical advice. Our information is intended to empower individuals, their families, and healthcare professionals who want to collaborate in the most effective ways on this journey to health and well-being. Please see a licensed and qualified medical professional for your medical needs. Before we begin our presentation, I would like to give a short Stay Sharp program update. If you could advance the slides, that would be great. So here at Sharp again, our mission is to educate and empower people to take charge of their cognitive health. We do that by supporting people through webinars like this one, in-person presentations, and our very informative website. But by far the most effective offering is our small group coaching program, the Foundational Coaching. This program offers live education and support facilitated by a certified health coach. Now going into our 4th year, we are pleased to let you know that our first programs of 2020 are now open for registration. The January group begins Tuesday, January 30th, and the second one begins on Wednesday, February 21st. Both start at 12 p.m. These groups meet via Zoom once a week for 6 consecutive weeks. In the small group program, participants begin to identify and modify lifestyle factors that might be impacting their brain health. They learn from one another's experiences, and this community experience has been the highest ranked aspect of the programs. During the small group program, we focus on 4 lifestyle areas which we know greatly affect cognition and which people have control over: stress, sleep, nutrition, and exercise. Participants have access to an online teaching platform for the educational videos, quizzes, and resources that accompany each topic module, which will prepare them for the virtual coaching sessions. The price of this program is only $99, and it is significantly subsidized through the generosity of our donors. The actual cost of $450 per participant, so it is an enormous value. If you're just beginning to notice the memory impairment or want to learn how to keep your brain sharp, the program is an excellent place to start. And I want to give a quick brain health or a quick webinar update. If you could advance that slide. Please mark your calendars for the next webinar, Brain Health 101, Preventing Cognitive Decline Workshop. This will be on Tuesday, January 9th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time with Steve Ladina and Myra Oni. They will explore the common causes of cognitive decline and outline the simple lifestyle changes that you can take now to make a lasting positive impact on your brain health. You will receive the coaching program and webinar details in our follow-up email with the webinar recording link by tomorrow afternoon. And now I would like to introduce Carol Sharp, our Executive Director, who will introduce our guest speaker. Carol, are you there?
I am. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this afternoon for the upside of stress for brain health. We're quite honored to have our speaker, Dr. Ilene Naomi Rusk. Dr. Rusk is the director of the Healthy Brain Program in Colorado and is coordinator of the Rehabilitation and Trauma Treatment Centers. She has a Ph.D. from the University of Birmingham in England and has authored numerous papers in the areas of psychology, neuropharmacology, neuroscience, in areas as diverse as cerebral palsy in children, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, and the effects of neurotransmitters on behavior. She is trained with Dr. Dale Bredesen and the Institute for Functional Medicine in using an integrative approach to working with cognitive decline and dementia prevention, creating flexibility in the nervous system, and incorporating trauma healing strategies form the basis of her resiliency approach to cognitive health and Alzheimer's treatment. Dr. Rusk also utilizes her expertise in her humanitarian work in countries around the world that are affected by disasters and war. If you have any questions about Dr. Rusk's presentation today, please type them in the chat box and we'll answer them during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. And now I'd like to turn it over with a very warm welcome to Dr. Ilene Naomi Rusk. Thank you, Dr. Rusk.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm not sure if I'm spotlighted yet. Oh, yes, there okay, good. Hi, everyone. Let me just advance my slides and welcome you to the presentation. It's kind of a busy first slide, but fun. And I want this presentation to be lighthearted and also serious. We're always living in a time when stress is around us. We just came out of a pandemic. We are bombarded with news of war and distress. So I feel like we need to be focusing on the upside of stress and how to work with stress in our own bodies and our own nervous systems. The talk is called The Upside of Stress. I love being here with Sharp again, by the way, very close to my heart, this organization. I'm very dedicated to all of the pillars of brain health that Sharp again speaks about. And indeed, they are the same pillars that I use as guideposts in my own clinic. The reason I have a crown on this first slide is because I'm going to be talking to you about a new perspective on stress. And it seems to me, having done some research, that I found the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth, recently deceased, to have had incredible stress coping strategies. So I'll combine these subjects, the teaching you a little bit about stress in general, stress in your own bodies, and integrate that into a new model for incorporating stress into brain health strategies. So this is an image not of me, but could have been me in the 80s and 90s when I was looking for a single targeted strategy, that one silver bullet that would cure Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease or Lewy body dementia. And I was working for pharmaceutical companies. I was focused on the smallest, tiniest molecule that might make a change in a very complex neuropathology associated with each of those illnesses. And indeed, we didn't find an answer looking at the small minutia of just the single targeted strategy. More recently, I found a paper in 2014, almost 10 years ago, which for those of you who are following Dr. Bredesen's work and our work, it's hard to believe that it's been 10 years and we've come a very long way. And now we're looking at all of the possible contributors to cognitive decline, all of those things that we know make a big impact. We can slow down progression. We can prevent cognitive decline. And it takes effort and it takes a new perspective. We also have an additional burden on our brains since the pandemic. And I'm mentioning this because I think working with stress and working with the pillars of brain health and a functional medicine approach is more important now than ever. So we know that having COVID rapidly accelerated the structural and functional changes in patients who already had dementia. COVID was a dementia accelerator. COVID itself, there's some evidence that it shrunk certain brain regions, even if you didn't have dementia. But a recent study looked at the impact of just the pandemic-related stress on brain health. And guess what? With all of the significant pandemic-related disruptions, the prevalence of fatigue and brain fog and loneliness and depression, it turns out that healthy people who had lockdown or stay-at-home orders had also had elevated neuroinflammatory markers compared to before the lockdown. So the implication here is that there's been a neuroimmune activation underlying these non-viral changes in the pandemic brain, which is, again, not just a COVID afflicted brain, but it's actually the experience we had through all of the challenges during the pandemic. So that's why I think focusing on stress right now is really important. And to remind everyone that memory problems come because of a lot of different reasons, have a lot of different etiologies. And I want to highlight some of the origins of memory problems so that people don't assume that memory problems are because of Alzheimer's disease. Parkinson's disease, there can be memory problems associated with Parkinson's disease. In fact, I'm using the word memory loosely. Each of these conditions has a different pattern of cognitive change. Parkinson's disease has cognitive change associated with it. Lewy body disease has its own. Progressive supranuclear palsy, frontotemporal dementia, polypharmacy, meaning many people, especially aging people, are on many medications that affect their cognition. Just having attention deficit disorder can cause cognitive problems, attentional problems that look like and are memory problems sometimes. And of course, depression, which I'm going to be mentioning in this talk so that you know a little bit about the relationship between stress, depression, and dementia, because indeed, they're quite intertwined. And finally, we're finding huge numbers of patients who have cognitive problems because of COVID, because of the pandemic-related stress, and because of the illness itself. The only way to determine really the pattern of cognition so that you can then have a proper diagnosis is to do a neuropsychological battery. Now, batteries can be, we can scale them. They can be really small. They can be, I guess the shortest battery in our clinic is about 40 minutes, depending upon really what your capacity is. So seeing a good neuropsychologist is great. Usually they're done in person. In our clinic, we have a remote neurocognitive screening. I won't call it a neuropsychological test. So if you have more questions about that, then save them for the end. But these are all of the different domains that we test: attention and concentration, processing speed, learning, visuospatial functioning, executive functions, memory, and sensation and perception. Here are some of the modifiable root causes of Alzheimer's disease. And I'm not going to be talking about much of the physiology or systems biology today at all. I'm going to be talking more about the pillars of brain health, which include stress, and I'll share the other 6 pillars in a slide or two. But basically, if we take a deeper dive, which I always recommend to my patients, and look at toxins, hormonal changes or trophic factors, medications, medical issues like blood pressure, problems with your liver, problems with blood sugar and insulin resistance, environmental toxins, heavy metals, inflammation. These are all contributors, but I'm putting stress here because stress indeed affects all of the other modifiable factors. And we have this wonderful endogenous, endemic, natural capacity within ourselves to make deep and lasting changes in our nervous system. We have agency, that's the word. We have agency because our nervous system is flexible. And it's neuroplasticity that we engage when we're developing new skills, when we're challenging ourselves. We can develop new skills and change our minds and our brains if we have effort, if we put in the time, even small changes, if we practice positive changes towards brain health and we set our intention on it every morning when we wake up. And I really recommend that my patients have a great morning routine And I suggest that you all consider having a great morning routine, even if it's 5 minutes, to set an intention, to engage neuroplasticity, the positive neuroplasticity that creates positive change in our physical health, our mental health, and our brain health. As Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. And neuroplasticity benefits from repeatedly doing. And I say that we become what we repeatedly think and feel. And an important aspect of my talk on stress and mental health and cognitive health is that indeed we do impact our physiology by what we think and what we feel. So it's important to be paying attention to how we think and how we feel. Here are the 6 pillars of brain health that I'm going to share with you. I know there are 6 pillars that Sharp again share with you as well, which is wonderful. And I have another 6 pillars, which I'll share with you another time. The ones I'll be spending a little bit of time on today and sharing some anecdotal and data-driven tidbits about the Queen, about our food, nutrition, digestion, eating mostly plants, having prebiotics and probiotics in your diet, having a lot of fiber. That's one pillar. Movement is the next pillar. And I recommend that my patients have varied, challenging movements that are different each day. So walking is great, but that's kind of like a baseline activity. That's not the kind of exercise that would be a goal for me and any of my patients. But that's a wonderful, wonderful place to start. And it's okay if you're going to like increase your walking distance, duration, or speed, then that's great because you're varying it and you're challenging it. But I also recommend resistance training. Very important to have this interoceptive internal connection with our muscles as we move. And it can be super, super slow and low weights, slow tempo. I recommend restful and calming exercises like yoga, like Tai Chi. There's a lot of data supporting all of these interventions that I'm suggesting. And of course, as much cardio as you can do. I think that, I don't want to quote, I think that the weekly recommended is 120 or 150 minutes a week of exercise. And I'd say you could do better than that. I'd say it's a good goal. And again, introducing challenge is important. Sleep, a consistent sleep schedule with a cool room. Preparing well for sleep is important. Understanding that you bring worries from the day into your sleep and knowing that you can drop them before bed. You can write down some notes, you can journal before bed so that you leave your worries, you leave your concerns in a journal to be taken care of by the Sandman, the dream angels, whoever is watching over that book, that dream journal or that sleep journal at night. So you can drop your worries before you go to bed a little bit. I have some other good sleep strategies. And of course, during sleep, we clear toxins from our brain with our lymphatic system. And dreaming helps us consolidate memories. So we have some very important neurophysiologic changes that happen, adaptive during sleep. Social engagement, something we lost during COVID and which we are becoming much more appreciative of and capitalizing on these days. But our social engagement should be meaningful, honest, interesting, which means challenging and fun. Cognitive stimulation means that every day you're putting on your curious hat, you're challenging yourself, and you're engaging stress, the kind of stress that I'll talk to you about today, that I am speaking to you about, which is engaging, challenging, stimulating, and forces a little bit of a disorienting dilemma. It's like, I don't really understand this, but I'm going to move toward it as a challenge. And so cognitive stimulation should be daily. And if it involves creativity, even better. Like ceramics involves motor skills, it involves cognitive skills. So being able to focus is really important. So The final pillar of brain health is stress, managing stress, depression, and healing old trauma. And that really involves a willingness to be self-aware, embodied, mindful, and it helps us to build emotional resilience. And it turns out having faith and purpose are also important components of reducing stress, helping with trauma, and relieving depression. So it's how we perceive stress that matters. And this was the most captivating matter for me for our talk today. A little known study, well, maybe you know about it, done in 2012 that's been reported on, quotes, high amounts of stress and the perception that stress impacts health are associated with poor health and mental health. So basically, in this study, they looked at stress and perception of stress, and they were able to separate them into different categories and look at their different impacts. It turns out that individuals who perceived that stress affected their health, and they also reported large amounts of stress, had increased risk of premature death. And I thought this number was extremely high. So basically, whether we perceive stress as damaging to us or not, impacts our health directly. And that's one of the main subject lines for this presentation today. If you want to read a good book that I haven't read in a long time, actually, Kelly McGonigal wrote a book called The Upside of Stress, I believe. So this is a normal stress response. We're scared, we're threatened by something. A tiger is chasing this boy, but he's getting a sense of relief because he knows that there's a treehouse that he can run up to and feel safe in that the tiger can't get up into. And so he gets this transient stress arousal, and then joyfully, he gets a sense of relief. And that's a physiologic stress response that is normal. So he's fleeing from the tiger. This is a very simplistic slide. The nervous system is very complex, and often we go into different kinds of collapse or freeze responses, which I'm not talking about in this presentation, but you're welcome to ask me about at the end of the talk. So he goes through this normal stress response and he feels relief. That's a transient stress response. And guess what? That's good for us. That's like running a race or going hard at the gym like I did yesterday. But there's some stressors that just don't go away. And sometimes we're in a relationship, unfortunately, that causes persistent and consistent stress. And sometimes we're in a work environment that is not very friendly. COVID was a very persistent and damaging stressor. And so is being a caregiver, chronic illness, being aware of the climate crisis. All of these things can put us into a stress response. We can either get very activated like that boy does as he's fleeing, or it can put us into kind of a helpless response. And right now I want each of you to notice, where do you go with a stress response that might be a chronic stressor? Because we all have them in our lives, right? Where do you go with that chronic stress response? Into more of a hyper aroused or more of a collapsed, helpless and hopeless place? Now, this is a very complicated slide. It's kind of intended to be because I want you to get overwhelmed by how much stress does to our bodies. First of all, here you'll see that in this diagram of the body, stress affects every organ system in one way or another. And I also want you to see that on the right, it's my right, from a neurophysiologic point of view, there's a difference between a chronic stressor and an acute stressor, as I was sharing with you. A chronic stressor activates the hypothalamus and the HPA axis, one of our stress systems, and an acute stressor activates the brainstem for a very quick reaction, like feeling as though accidentally you touched a hot pan on the stove and you have to pull your hand away very quickly, and you have a stress response. And once you pull your hand away, that stress response diminishes. You can see the HPA axis gets activated in these chronic stressors that we're talking about today. It secretes corticotrophin releasing hormone. It impacts the pituitary to the adrenal, which sits right above the kidneys, and then it stimulates neurochemical changes in the body. What's key here is the cortisol and the adrenaline and noradrenaline. It's the cortisol that is healthy and important when it's transient, but when it's chronic, it acts as a neurotoxin. And we have visible and invisible stress in our lives and in our bodies. And the reason I'm saying this is because each of us holds stress in little hidden pockets that we may not realize. So an example might be high blood pressure. We may not realize that we have high blood pressure that is driven, that has a root cause in stress. But if we begin to religiously do stress relieving exercises, in addition to taking all of the medications and following all the protocols that your physician recommends, we may indeed notice visible changes in our blood pressure. So just notice for yourselves, where might I be stressed and where might my body be feeling it that I haven't recognized yet? So I'm presenting a new mindset on stress to you. A new perspective on stress is that we can change our mindset from just believing that stress is bad to understanding that stress can be embraced. It's a normal and very adaptive part of our physiology and our lives. We can respond to it in better ways to keep us healthier. We can harness it. We can harness stress for motivation, for courage, and to challenge us. So thanks for being with me on this journey. There are three kinds of stress. There's distress. Distress is the chronic stress or acute stress that's very uncomfortable, that does not feel good, and that we do not like. I'm just checking my time. There is eustress, which is actually good stress, the motivating stress that I was talking to you about. There's hormesis, which is an important word for you all, because I think it's hormesis and eustress that we're looking to build when we teach brain health habits and we coach you on how to engage your body, your mind, and your brain for better health. Hormesis is a small dose of stress, and it actually prompts a positive adaptation, which leaves our cells younger. So it's like working a muscle and it hurts, and some of your muscle fibers might like shear and have distress, but ultimately over time it builds muscle. And it's our perception of stress that counts. What's the relationship between stress and dementia? Well, we have elevated cortisol. I showed you what happened with the HPA axis and our stress response. We can have direct neural effects. We can have metabolic dysfunction. We can have neuroinflammation and HPA axis dysfunction. These are all of the different ways in which stress affects the brain. And the hippocampus is very vulnerable. The hippocampus is a main memory area in the brain. It's very small, but very significant. And it's very vulnerable to stress hormones. I'm including depression in here because for a long time, we haven't really been sure, does depression cause dementia? Do people with dementia get depressed because they have cognitive problems and their lives are changing? This has always been a question in my mind in the last 40 years and in the literature as well. And the question is, does having Alzheimer's disease cause depression, or does depression cause Alzheimer's? It turns out that about a third to half of the people with Alzheimer's also have major depressive disorder. People who have Alzheimer's and depression have more rapid cognitive decline with more plaques and more tangles in the hippocampus than people who aren't depressed. And stress is very associated with depression. And I'm bringing it in here because people who are going to be listening to this talk, all of us have the ability to be stressed. We know people who are depressed, and it's important to know that there's a relationship between being stressed and being depressed. And in a recent study, I think it was published just within the last month or two, a Swedish group looked at people many people, 1.3 million people, during their midlife, early midlife, I would say, and asked them about their chronic stress, their depression, or both of them together. Do you have chronic stress and depression? Do you just have stress? Or do you just have depression? And this is, I think, a very important new study showing that chronic stress and depression together are additive. So if we can be working on our depression and our stress as we age, we're going to actually really be benefiting brain health. Emotional health is a direct contributor to brain health, and there's a very strong relationship between mental health disorders and neurologic disorders later in life. We can perceive stress in several different ways, and I want you to connect with your own bodies right now, where you're sitting. Notice that your own body has information in it that it transmits to the brain, and that's a bottom up. I don't know if you could see my cursor here. That's your heart rate, your respiration rate, your lungs, your sweating. That's informing your body and your brain. You also have top-down influences, and those top-down influences are information coming from your brain, worries, challenges, catastrophic thinking, repeated negative thinking that are informing your body, and your body is receiving information that's becoming, again, physiologic reactions. I think about a big stressor, my heart rate goes up. It was funny, what just came to me is my son, who had a car accident a few years ago, and just thinking about it right now, because I was trying to think of an example for you guys, I could feel my heart. Thank God he's totally fine, but it's interesting the way a past memory, and this is very important, a past memory can cause a present feeling. We also have stressors that are from the external environment that enter us, and those stressors are environmental toxins, pollution, relationships, things that are outside of us, mold. So I want you to, take a look at all three of these and get to know the stressors in your environment, your own thoughts, your own sensations, and the stressors that are environmental stressors that might be toxins. Our nervous system can go into several different states. This is a complicated slide, but actually I'll simplify it for you. We can get hyper aroused. We can get really nervous and panicky. We could feel angry. We could attack. We could have a racing heart. We are breathing more quickly. Our physiology is very racy and activated. We can go into the opposite state. We can get hypo-aroused, where it's really kind of hard for us to engage. We're pretty helpless. You see my head's down. I'm tired. My body posture is pulled back. Helpless. I'm lethargic. I'm alone. And neither of these, neither the hyper-aroused or the hypo-aroused, are good for brain health. And they're certainly not good for happiness or thriving. They're also not good places for us to learn and engage in these new and challenging, stressful things that are actually good for us. In fact, this is the wellness window, the window of resilience, where we're connected, we're feeling good, we're feeling safe. We're getting cues of we're okay. We care about other people, we're calm, we're receptive, we're able to learn, we're able to pay attention. And this is very important for brain health and for engaging any of those pillars of brain health or physical health. And the Queen, given all that she had, all the stressors that she had, she was a super ager. She was someone who lived long, lived well, and lived cognitively healthily, physically healthily, and cognitively well as well. She had a lot of stress. She said that it was her anxiety was cured when she became queen. She just focused her stress in very positive directions. She had a lot of daily requirements, a lot of worries. She had government and wars to opine about and on. She was a negotiator for many, and yet she had no real political power, but incredible responsibility. What did she do? She ate an anti-inflammatory diet. She had regular small meals. She had coffee. She had tea every morning. And black tea is a rich source of flavonoids, which is a bioactive compound that can decrease oxidative stress and decrease inflammation. It turns out that coffee, whether it's caffeinated or not, coffee that's well roasted also has some very healthful components in it for brain health and physical health. So I'd like you to take a look, if you want to, at a recent blog that I wrote that's on my website on coffee. It should have just been posted within the last week or so. Dark chocolate is a rich and powerful antioxidant as well. We just don't want to be eating dark chocolate that has sugar in it. So it has to be super dark. And their sugars, they're actually excellent chocolate bars now that have stevia in them. But chocolate has antioxidants that combat damage caused by free radicals that contribute to aging and health issues like heart disease, cancer, and Alzheimer's. And I mention this because I want just to bring into the foreground that heart health is directly related to brain health. So taking care of your heart is like taking care of your brain. Anti-inflammatory foods, and I'm just going to focus on the red writing here. This is an article from the journal Neurology. Many of us who do work with the Bredesen protocol recommend a ketogenic diet for people who have dementia or a keto flex diet, but that's not the general diet that's recommended by most of the journals or the World Health Organization. In fact, it's the MIND diet or the DASH diet. And this diet, these dietary recommendations come from the journal Neurology. And they said that people who consumed anti-inflammatory foods that included more fruits, vegetables, beans, tea, coffee, they had a lower risk of developing cognitive impairment later in life. So this is a really good place to start. 20 servings of fruit, 19 servings of vegetables, beans and other legumes, and again, coffee or tea. And the reason I'm highlighting this I want to share a little bit with you about the blue zones is because the blue zones are those places in the world where people live longest and healthiest. They're the people who really thrive well into their 90s. And this is how people in the blue zones eat. But they eat even more beans and legumes every day. So since I met with Dan Buettner at a conference that we were both speaking at last year, I have increased my bean and legume intake. I'm inviting you all to consider that if you're not on a ketogenic diet from your doctor. The Queen had great cognitive stimulation. She was engaged every day. She was consistently cognitively challenged. She kept on top of the latest news and political activities. She read the newspaper. She reviewed documents. She got a huge red box every morning that she had to go through. It was a combination of government, social, political, geographic, climate change, things she had to learn about and know about. So I want each of you to be thinking now about one area that you can work on to enhance your cognitive stimulation, your cognitive stress. So I'm using the word stress in a new way now because I'm actually wanting the adaptive stress. It's a little stressful or distressing not to be able to eat cake when you want to, thinking about stress and nutrition. But it's at those times when you're on the edge of discomfort that I want to invite you to sit with a little bit. I'm not saying don't eat the cake. I'd prefer you didn't. I'm not saying that you have to have a Queen's red box full of challenges every morning, but I'm inviting you to think about what would be challenging for you, that you're curious about, that interests you, but that will be a little bit disorienting. It could be like, I actually want to start pottery again because I want to work with my hands and I want to work with centering and I want to learn the slips and the glazes. That'll be challenging for me. So I'm going to finish with this slide. These challenging activities protect the brain, engage neuroplasticity, and help us build cognitive reserve, which is kind of like a safety deposit box in our cognitive web. We're building more connections, we're building more neural pathways. And with those new connections, we have a storehouse that we can then tap back into. It's like a reserve tank in a car. So that's a longer conversation because there's a lot of work that's been done on cognitive reserve. But yes, keep building the reserve tank and thinking in terms of positive stress when you're challenged. She had a simple but very effective sleep routine. In order to feel mentally prepared for her daily appointments, she always went to bed at the same time every night, 11 p.m., and she slept for 8.5 hours, which is a fabulous, huge amount of sleep. She woke up at 7:30 every day. She liked to read before bed. Sometimes I recommend to my patients that they read something not boring, but not too stimulating, something that can calm you, that you might actually fall asleep to. And she also made sure to fit in exercise every day. So I want to use stress and exercise as an example each time I speak to you, because again, the discomfort that we feel when we're straining a muscle, if it's healthy and you're working with a trainer and you know what you're doing, then that's muscle strain. That's a hormetic effect. That's an aspect of stress that really benefits us. If you're out of breath, like I come from sea level and I travel to Colorado sometimes, and then I try to hike up a mountain, and my breath is much more rapid and much more effortful. And I always see that as, okay, that's great. That's a really good kind of stress for me. I'm needing to acclimate to a higher altitude. And if you want to see this on my website, then I will happily put it on my website, but I won't go over how to sleep like a queen or a king during this talk. But there's certain protocols that I'm more than happy to share with you during the Q&A as well. And the queen had faith and purpose, and that's an important component of superagers, those people who live cognitively well and physically well into their 90s and 100s. They have faith and they have purpose, whether it's their grandchildren or it's God or it's nature or it's saving the planet. And in Japan, it's called ikigai. The queen always felt as though she wasn't, in fact, in charge, that there was a higher power in charge. She was a religious woman, and many people don't believe in God. So it doesn't really matter what you believe in. It's to believe in something, to believe in your worth, your purpose, your value in this lifetime on this earth. What do you look forward to? What are you contributing to? And I think that's why the literature on being a volunteer and longevity and cognitive health is so important, because even if it's just my father started going to the palliative care unit at our local hospital in Montreal, and that gave him an incredible sense of purpose. So every Wednesday, he connected with people on the palliative care unit. The Queen believes in God. And so let me just share with you some of the things that she said. Someone else is ultimately in charge, which I think is really an amazing quote. She addressed the Australian Parliament and said, it's my resolve that under God, I shall not only rule, but serve. So she's serving God. She's not just serving her people. I know that the only way to live my life is to take the long view and put my trust in God. So again, I'm not suggesting that anyone on this call believe in God, but that you find your own bigger connection to meaning and purpose. There's some key ingredients to understanding your stress system. And one of them is a willingness to be self-aware, a willingness to feel your feelings, and to look through that bottom-up lens, to be spending more time focusing on your breath, noticing your heart rate, noticing any distress in your body or cramping, and also spending time looking for areas in your body that feel like really relaxed, really calm. So to get very granular about body sensations, somatic granularity. How about that? I just coined that term. So you get really granular about what's going on in my body and just where can I find a place of ease and comfort in my body, and a willingness to take care of yourself. Again, appreciating that our stress system is adaptive and can be used to our benefit. So in these last few slides I'm sharing with you, I wanted to talk about some of the ways in which we can actually modify, modulate, and change our physiology to create stress reduction. And breathing is a great way to do it. Breathing exercises stimulate the vagus nerve, they increase oxygen, and they create nervous system flexibility. I'm going to highlight one of these particular breathing tools. And the key here is choice and knowing that you can do what feels best for you in your body. Diaphragmatic breathing is just beginning to notice that if we have a high breath that's very chesty and very kind of in our throat, that's more of a panic breath. So my invitation is to try diaphragmatic breathing first, where you breathe in a regulated way and you make your belly like a balloon. That lowers the breath and it changes your nervous system. Humming, chanting, saying voo also stimulates the vagus nerve, and it creates calm all the way into your digestive tract. Body scan meditation. By the way, all the things I'm suggesting are very data-driven. So a body and breath focused meditation, bringing again your attention to your body and noticing different sensations as you scan down from head to toe or from toe to head. And I'm going to put this on my website for you guys, so you have a copy of it, or better yet, I'll have Joan send it to you so that you can read it on your own. And maybe I'll even dictate it so you can listen to me speaking about how to do this before bed. This is great for sleep. There's a lot of data showing that this enhances a better sleep onset and a longer sleep duration, or less awakenings in the middle of the night. You see some references here on the bottom of body scan. This is in Ukrainian because I used a similar slide for a Ukrainian presentation that I gave. You can write to soothe your stress. There's a lot of data showing just 3 to 5 minute sessions of writing your emotions, writing about your emotions in a very non-concerned way about what it sounds like or grammar or punctuation for 15 minutes. There's a lot of data showing that this is a great stress reducer. And of course, movement, all kinds of movement. Movement and gestures help relieve traumatic stress. Feeling strong, doing body movements that make you feel strong. That's why yoga is so great. You can do so many different types of body movements. Shaking is a great way to relieve stress. And all of the other kinds of exercise that I shared with you today as well. Resistance training, aerobic training. So building emotional resilience helps release stress. When we share our difficult feelings, when we connect with someone we trust, somatic or body-based treatments or movements, when we work to actually feel a sense of relief and release, when we tend to our grief, and when we heal old ruptures from old relationships or new relationships where there's strain, that releases and relieves some of that invisible stress that I was talking to you about And we build emotional resilience also by believing that stress makes us more courageous and that it strengthens us. And it turns out that the habits of both stress resilient people and brain healthy people are the same. The habits of stress resilient people and brain healthy people are the same. They eat a lot of vegetables and plants. They exercise. They have a consistent sleep schedule. They engage socially, and there's warm connection. They have good cognitive challenges. They heal trauma and work with stress. And they have faith, soul purpose, and devotion of some kind, and use stress as motivational and courage building. And I encourage all of you to do that as well. So we can change our mindsets. This is a new mindset on stress. We can change our mindset from believing that stress is bad to understanding that stress can be embraced, and those feelings in our body that we often shy away from and retreat from can be used to move us forward with curiosity and courage. Cortisol can be used in that way, that neurohormone I talked to you about at the beginning. Stress is a normal, adaptive, important part of our biology. It's an important part of our lives, and we can respond to it in better ways to keep us healthier. We can harness it for motivation, courage, and challenge. And I just want to say thank you to all of you. If you want more information about the work that I do, if you want an online cognitive screening and feedback session, if you want just to ask questions, then please feel more than welcome to call our office or to ask questions now. And thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm going to unpin you so that you can see the gallery, or remove the spotlight. I do have one quick question. Does the little bit of 1% milk that I put in my black tea negate the goodness of it?
I don't think so, but that is such a good question. No, I don't think it does. But I'm actually into if that interferes with that, because that's really your question, right?
Yeah.
It would impact a ketogenic diet, but I don't think it impacts the benefit of the coffee, whether it's caffeinated or not caffeinated.
Yeah. I don't drink coffee except if I'm traveling and there isn't any boiling water used to make my tea.
Oh, so you're a tea drinker.
Yes. Yeah.
You and the Queen. I'd love to answer any questions you have. Okay.
If you have questions, you can unmute or drop those in the chat box.
I'll say something. I packed in a lot of information into a short talk, and I could probably give a separate talk on all of those things, on just the Queen, on just stress, on just depression. So at least you got a taste, though, of some of the actionables. And I'm going to invite everyone to read the blogs on my website if you want to, and do some of the practices, because I actually want each person who listens to this to make a choice for themselves. That's a positive choice moving forward, even if it's just one. One small thing is better that you do is much better than 4 big things that you don't do.
Well, I will include the link to the coffee blog in my recap. I'll also include a link to Kelly McGonigal's The Upside of Stress book that you mentioned, information about the MIND diet, and was it the DASH diet, the other one you mentioned?
Hypertension one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and background on blue zones. And I will get a screen capture of the body scan slide and include that in my recap as well.
Send you a slide. I'll send you a good copy of it so you could share it with people.
Perfect. So any questions?
No questions. Let's look at the chat.
I don't see any in the chat.
I'm still learning so much about brain health and stress and our nervous system. And I guess is, since I don't have any questions, is get to know your own nervous system from the inside out. I think that there's a long thread through our lifespan that actually will end up determining our brain health. So get to know what your tendencies are. Do you tend to get helpless and depressed? Do you tend to get activated and angry? Are you a mix between the two? Most people are. I probably am. But I don't swing that much. And I think that's partly because I've worked on my stress resilience and I'm still working on it. And I'm working on my emotional awareness and I'm still working on it.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
it's an invitation to get to know our own nervous systems each day and how we react.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And let's see if I know how to do this. Oh, there we go.